Okay, so I'm Kate McRae, but I'm more commonly known as Wildlife Kate. And it's always hard when people say, "What do you do?" Because I don't really have a general job title, but I'm a wildlife enthusiast and I specialize in setting up cameras to really try and connect people with what's right on their doorstep. So, for example, I've now got in my new place where I live now in Wales, I've got 23 cameras wired back to a central PC, and all of those are recording 24/7. And I live stream a lot of these out on my website.
Amazing. So, for anyone who hasn't come across your work, could you tell us about your background and what led you to work within education, and obviously all the stuff you're doing with wildlife?
Okay, so in terms of wildlife, I've been completely obsessed with nature from when I was a tiny child, particularly birds. That's really what got me started. Um, and then that led to me training to be a teacher. So I trained to be a primary school teacher with environmental studies as my main. And for many years, I taught in the primary sector. I was head of science, head of IT, but wildlife and nature always featured strongly in my teaching. So if you were in my class, we would be outside invariably at lots of opportunities and learning all about nature. And so I taught in the primary sector for over 30 years, and the last 10 of those were in a big junior school in Nuneaton, where I was head of outdoor learning. So that was me developing the school grounds and then encouraging both teachers and pupils to get out and about and do their learning outside, as well as in the classroom. And I absolutely loved it. And then I moved here into Wales in September 23, sold up in Lichfield and bought a beautiful 3-acre site where I'm basically turning it into a nature reserve with cameras everywhere.
So a project that we work on obviously is to promote alternatives to things like chick hatching projects in classrooms. And often, as you'll know, like these hatching projects involved a lot of the time like chicken or duck eggs, and then they're hatched in these like artificial environments, and the welfare of the animals is really compromised. In your opinion, what would you say are some concerns that you would raise with this kind of project?
I think my biggest concern is that we are dealing in those kind of situations with live, real animals and with teachers and adults and children who are not used to dealing with live animals. Now, they come in a fairly structured, formulaic type setup, but in many cases, in a busy primary classroom, and I'm well familiar with what that's like, it is not a suitable environment for these animals to be in, especially as when I've seen them in schools, the chicks are overhandled and quite stressed out by the whole experience. And so are the staff, to be honest, especially if it doesn't go according to plan, which in nature, it quite often doesn't. So I think in today's world, although you might like the idea of that, it's a lot of extra work. It's a big, big responsibility for the adults involved, in an already busy and hectic environment. And I think in today's world, there are lots of alternatives that can give your pupils what they need without involving real live animals.
Well, yes, thinking about those alternatives, you mentioned all the amazing cameras that you're setting up on your land. For people who aren't maybe aware of what a nest box camera is, can you explain what it is and kind of how it works in simple terms?
Of course. So the technology now means that there's some fabulous kits that will let you have a small camera inside a nest box. Now, I don't just have ordinary nest boxes. I mean, I have the standard ones that you might have in your garden. So just a small box with a round hole. Many people will have these. The kind that a great tit or a blue tit might go in. And then the kit I've got has a small camera inside and it enables me, connected to my quite sophisticated system, to basically watch what's happening inside that box without disturbing the wildlife at all. So, of course, they don't know that you've got a camera and you're watching. And it means that I can live stream and allow people to share in that experience via the internet live. So this isn't a recording, although obviously I do lots of recordings. You can log in on a PC or on an interactive whiteboard or wherever you want to, at home and at school, and you and your pupils and your class can watch the whole story as it unfolds, which I think is really, really special. And if your class get really into it, there are plenty of options now for you to do exactly the same in your own school environment. Have your own camera Nest box, connect it to your interactive whiteboard via an app, and then watch it all yourself. And it is seriously addictive.
I can imagine. And so different to the more artificial environments that I suppose we get with chick hatching projects. How would you say that kind of watching a Nest box camera and people observing a full life cycle in the wild and kind of undisturbed, how would you say that feels to watch and engages young people as opposed to other projects?
I know it engages young people because I've used it numerous times. So when I was teaching, I would have the Nest box up on the interactive whiteboard when the kids first came in the morning. So as they came in the morning, they were able to see it up there. We talked all about the species. We talked all about the box. We learned all about what might happen if they choose to nest there. And believe me, the first time a bird comes in with a bit of moss in its beak, the class go crazy. They're like, oh my goodness, he's going to build a nest. And then, of course, you watch that happen as it happens for real. And then I think what I really found was that by doing that, the pupils became really, really keen on learning about the bird they were seeing. Now, in the case that the most times that I've done it, it's been a blue tit. And then they come in the next day and they're like, we've got blue tits in our garden. We're going to get a nest box. And then we learn about what we could do at home to possibly help wildlife in our own gardens. So basically, you're teaching those children about species they're seeing probably every day in their own gardens have never maybe noticed. And they are taking control in a way that means that they feel that they've been empowered because they could put up a nest box. They could plant plants that would be good for birds to help them in their own environment. So they're becoming early little naturalists.
That's the thing, actually, that leads really nicely to the next question. You've mentioned some there, some particularly exciting or memorable bits might be when the birds first bring in some moss, or when they're actually, they've decided that's the box they're going to use. But are there other moments that are frequently like pupils or adults will say they're the exciting bits that they look forward to or they remember each year?
To be honest, the whole process is exciting, especially the first time. So it's the first. So when they first start bringing things in, when you start to notice interesting behaviours, and that initiates children going, why are they doing that? What's happening here? And rather than it being rather formulaic, which some teaching can become if you're following, set guidelines, this is just so exciting because nobody really knows what's going to happen. So the nest building is exciting, especially that first moment. When they lay the first egg, obviously, we all go ballistic again. And then we basically see one egg a day laid. So the children are constantly, can we see two now? Other two, other three? They often cover them up first thing in the morning. So pupils log on at home, because by the time they get to school, often the egg's been covered and they're like, I saw it this morning. And you find pupils are then sharing it with parents and parents are getting involved. It's so good. And then you've got the incubation period, which is about 2 weeks. And then, of course, the chicks start to hatch and then it really kicks off because the parents then are in and out and the children can see the chicks being fed. And there are times, I must admit, I obviously, when key things are happening, we tended to have it up on our whiteboard, even when I was teaching. or sometimes up on the whiteboard in the hall at dinner time, so everybody could share it if it wasn't just your class, and it was on the school website. But then there were some lessons, especially when the chicks were hatching, or if it was a lesson I really needed them to concentrate, I'd have to turn it off, because literally every time a bird came in, they were all like, oh, it's got a caterpillar, and then we'd all go off on a tangent for ages, which is fabulous. But yeah, watching the chicks grow, it happens so quickly. In just 3 weeks, they go from tiny, weeny, like little jelly beans that are the size of your thumbnail to a ready to go blue tit. So they see the whole process, they watch their feathers grow, they watch all the food that's being brought in, and they really understand the process that's involved, and also how dependent those birds are on what's happening outside the nest box. And that's where they come in. That's where they have a role.
And I can imagine, like, with teachers who have experienced like nest box cameras as an alternative, there, I'm sure completely, as you say, there's no looking back, and I'm sure they'd never go away from that again. But what about like a teacher that might be considering a chick catching project? Is there anything you would say to somebody like that to convince them the benefits, not just the excitement, but in terms of actually learning about like life cycles compared to chick catching projects?
Well, the chick hatching project is, it's so artificial and out of context, because of course eggs don't hatch in incubators normally, they're under a hen. And that hen's body is specially designed to incubate those eggs, and then for those eggs to hatch under the right humidity, through nature, and then for that hen to then look after her chicks. And believe me, seeing the real thing happen is way better. So you bringing eggs artificially in an incubator, straight up, you haven't got a real life cycle. I think what people get caught up on is chicks are very cute, little fluffy, the idea that everybody could get their hands on them and stroke them and hold them, and it's going to be something they'll always remember. But I tend to think of it about, would you want that of your, I just think of the animals, and I think that constant handling, unless you are an experienced teacher, the only time I've ever hatched chicks in school is when we kept hens at school. We had homes set up. If they were all cockerels, then I knew that they'd all got homes and we would keep the chicks. But the whole story of what happens afterwards obviously varies. But for children, it's just not real. It's not a real life cycle. And what you're watching in these live cameras is a real life cycle as it happens in nature. And that's what we're trying to teach children all about. So I think a live camera, if you want to teach a life cycle, a real life cycle, a nest box camera kit, or following my cameras, and it isn't just blue tits and great tits. I've had nuthatches, I've got tawny owls, so I've got all sorts of species that are live streaming real birds in our British habitat, and so you can just bring in so much more learning.
Yeah, it sounds like it's not just about what you're learning, because like you say, you've got all the different species and it's much more representative and accurate to a life cycle, but it's how you're learning as well, and instilling that kind of the respect and the idea that wildlife shouldn't be rushed or handled, but has its own rhythms. What aspects do you think about nest box cameras that really show pupils about those kind of natural wildlife rhythms and why they shouldn't be rushed? What are the kind of strong moments that they get to witness?
Well, I think they see things that are happening that they can see outside of school. I think that's the important thing, is that by teaching them and then watching life cycles in this way, what's happening is that they're going home and noticing those life cycles at home as well. So they may see blackbirds collecting nesting material. They may see magpies and pigeons carrying sticks. We can go out and make our own nests outside and realise how hard it is, and look out for these birds and what they're doing. And I just think it puts it in a real context in their own environments as well. And also, you know, you have to bear in mind that most of the time with these boxes, everything is fine. But I always say to the children at the beginning, this is real nature, you know, anything could happen. Sometimes chicks die. They invariably, not the whole clutch survives. So there's lots of other opportunities to talk to pupils about what's happening and why that might be. And I think that's way more valuable in their lives than another artificial setup with chicks that they may never see, well, they probably will never see again. And yeah, they might get to hold it a couple of times, but really the learning that's going on, I feel, is pretty shallow compared to what you can achieve with live cameras.
Yeah, obviously provides so much actual knowledge for children and young people. Do you find it also helps build a sense of empathy as well as knowledge towards wildlife, but also maybe other animals in their environment or animals they hadn't thought about before as well?
Absolutely, because I think you tend to, and we all do it, if you see birds around your garden all the time, blue tits, great tits, robins, you don't think of them as individuals. But when you start watching a nest box and you get to, you know, at the beginning, particularly with with great tits, you can tell the male from the female. Their plumage is slightly different. Blue tits much harder, so you get to know which is the male and which is the female by their behaviour. Like, only the female incubates, so as soon as you see the female on a bird on the eggs, you know it's the female, and invariably you end up giving them names. And I think the thing is, you get to know those as individual birds rather than just a blue tit or a tawny owl. And soon as you do that, then empathy comes alongside that straight away, because you worry about what's happening to that bird when it leaves that nest box. You know, it's got all these babies to look after, and the big wide world is quite dangerous when you're a small bird. So yeah, that side of empathy, of knowing that creature as an individual rather than just a species, helps build empathy. And also understanding how all sorts of things affect that little family that you're watching. It could be the weather, it could be so if we have really hot, dry periods, those chicks don't drink as such. They get all the moisture they need from all the caterpillars that the adults bring in. So if conditions are really difficult, then they sometimes can't find those caterpillars, or if the habitat isn't good, or if you've cut down all your trees, or if somebody sprayed the local field where they were looking for their insects with an insecticide. Suddenly you're looking at that little blue tit in the context with its whole environment, and how all of the things we do as individuals outside of that nest box are going to impact on that bird. Now, what better learning is there than that? Because those children then see themselves within the environment. They see that the things they do and the changes they make in their lives will affect other things. And we must, and I think I always said to the pupils I worked at, you know, they're growing up in a world that is just full of negativity. You know, this is happening, this has gone wrong. And I'm like, the most important thing is to remember that you can make a difference in the way that you behave every day and the decisions you make as you grow up into how you're going to behave. And our school was big, you know, over 700 pupils. I said, imagine if all of us in, you know, sometimes I do assemblies, 700 pupils. Imagine if we all decided just to do one thing to make our gardens a little bit better. What a big impact that might have on the wildlife in our area. Now, if you keep doing that as you grow up, and so do all the other children in all the other schools, then all those little tiny bits that we do turn into something much bigger. And to me, that's the most important learning of all.
So you've obviously mentioned there all the amazing other like skills that can be learned by pupils when they're like watching these nest box cameras. Do you find that there are, on top of that, like other things you've noticed with pupils? Obviously we've got empathy, but because obviously pupils these days, young people, are so disconnected from nature, do you notice that there's been this kind of like, once they've engaged in something like nest box cameras, that they've got more of a passion for the wildlife that surrounds them and actually an interest in something that they may not have known about before?
Yeah, I think what we noticed was how universal the interest was. So even, you know, some of the kids you thought they're never going to want to watch a nest box, they really did get into it. And I think because we didn't just do it as a lesson. It wasn't like, oh, now we're going to sit down and do our nest box lesson, because it became, for sort of certainly when the chicks had hatched, for 3 weeks, that box was up on the whiteboard just about, well, it was every day. And depending what we were doing in the classroom, whether it would be there all the time or in the background, you know, just like a little pop-up. and I was amazed at how many pupils went on to watch it at home. Because depending on when Easter falls, sometimes the Easter holidays fall in a critical point at which chicks are about to fledge, or because of course Easter date changes. So pupils were able to carry on watching because this camera is live and it can be embedded on certainly when I was at school, we embedded it on the school website, but they run on my website too. So pupils were able, excuse me, to keep watching. It wasn't just them that got involved, it was the whole family. And being able to impart information to those children and for them to generate questions, you know, teachers are like, well, I don't know anything about them. You don't need to, because you learn as you watch. I mean, obviously there's some nuggets of information we can share, things to look out for and sort of background info. But really, one of the joys was watching teachers learn alongside the pupils. You were all watching it together. And in terms of being a primary teacher, it's easy because it's there, it's happening. You know, the kids are interested. And as a teacher, interested children and great questions are just wonderful.
Yeah.
So we incorporated it into so much other work. You know, we did artwork, we did language-based work, we did maths, we did some tallies where groups of children did like tallies of how many times the birds had come in. There is literally, you could cover just about every topic in some way, every subject in some way by watching these cameras. And you'll get ideas as you go along, because you see something and you think, you know, we've got to do, I don't know, letter writing or something in your literacy. And you think, imagine if we could get that blue tip would write a letter to the owners of the house, you know, and the garden about what they thought about it. You know, it's just about being creative, really. The possibilities are endless.
There were teachers or parents who were a bit wary of that switch and they didn't really feel confident to do a different project. Obviously with chick catching, they're animals that are domestic and they may feel more confident to be around that. But you've kind of answered it there, but if you could sum it up in one sentence, why would you say to a teacher or parents that nest box cameras are the way to go instead of these other types of initiatives?
One sentence, oh, that'll be a challenge. I think the thing is, it's easy. I'm doing all the work. I've set all the cameras up, and all you've got to do is pull it up onto your whiteboard, and the story will tell itself. You know, I think that's the thing, that it will happen, and you'll all get hooked. I can guarantee it.
Love that.
When people do get convinced and they do choose to use nest box cameras, you know, and more kind of authentic observation of wildlife, what's the most common reaction that you often get from young people, and are any of them ever kind of surprised by what they see and learn?
I think I'm always amazed at how little people know. I suppose when you've when you're like me and it's something you've watched since you were a child, well, certainly not inside nest boxes, but inside nest boxes probably for the last 15 years, I've watched this cycle over and over again, and I never lose that same excitement, and I always learn something new. But I think what amazes me is that how little children know about what happens, and adults. I'm not just talking about children here. From being able to ID a blue tit for a start, most of the kids didn't know what it was called. Yet these are birds that are in our gardens, common birds. So that was the first thing, is getting children and adults to connect with what's right out on their doorstep. Because unless you do connect to nature outside, how are we expecting children to go ahead and care for their environment and want to save it when they don't even know what's on their doorstep, let alone rainforests and goodness knows what else? Conservation starts at home. Conservation starts about what you can do as an individual in your own space. So literally, I would say most people who watch this for the first time have no idea what's going on. Like, had no idea the complexities of what's going on. Just watching a tiny bird like that build a nest is a miracle. And we did it outside of where I said, so what if I tied your hands behind your back and you had to make an entire nest just using your mouth? And they were like, well, we can't do that. So I just they were only allowed to use one hand like a beak. So they'd have to collect sticks and twigs and like pack it all down. And there's all really interesting behaviours the birds do to make the hollow. And they collect one material first of all. Blue tits and great tits, generally it's moss. So they'll collect moss until they've got a lovely deep bed of moss, and they'll do this special little dance in the middle to press the moss down to make a little hollow. And then they'll start bringing in soft materials to line it. So we looked at all different kinds of materials and why they might want feathers and what we could do to help them. Could we put materials out that might help them with their nest searching? So it's just constant excitement, because everything you see, you're like, whoa, I never realized they did that. Or how clever is that tiny bird to do all of that? And then how on earth do they find all the little caterpillars and insects that they're feeding their chicks? We went out one day and I said, right, the challenge is for someone to find a caterpillar. 30 kids outside searching, nobody found a caterpillar. Yet these blue tits are going out and bringing back, hundreds a day. It's phenomenal. So yes, there's awe and wonder at every single moment.
I can really see that, because I think that one of the things that I'm most surprised about and that I've learned actually today is how broad of a resource nest box cameras are. And because obviously you think about it just in terms of the life cycle and the wildlife education, but when you think about it in a primary setting and how it can even be a secondary resource for them learning other life skills in a way that's also teaching kind of respect and observation and the kind of scientific mindset even, it's quite amazing and something that I hadn't even considered, especially when you think about comparing it to the kind of artificial chick hatching projects. Thinking about that comparison as well, so what would you say is the most important thing that children and young people would get from nest box cameras that they wouldn't then get from chick hatching, if you had to pick like a most important takeaway?
I think it's that bigger picture. It's that bigger picture of understanding that how these creatures fit into an ecosystem and how those pupils are also part of that ecosystem, and that the things we do impact on the creatures that we live alongside. And these kids are the future of the world. We've got to get them back connected with nature, help them learn to love it. And I taught for 30 years. Kids are no less interested in the natural world than they were when I taught 30 years ago, despite everything. I've got kids who are 10, 11 who'd never seen frog spawn, never touched it, never felt it, never really been shown the wonders of the natural world. And I think this can be a real you know, sort of diving board sort of moment for many kids who suddenly see what's happening in that nest box, start seeing blue tits on great tits in their own gardens or in their own parks, and maybe even get a nest box of their own, and then watch the whole thing, or maybe already got a nest box but not one with a camera in. And then, you know, it's something that I've certainly known families who've gone ahead then and bought nest box camera kits that following year. And I think the great thing is you can just tap into this and run it for a year and see what happens. Even if you decided, well, we'll just watch it, we won't necessarily, you know, incorporate it and plan it all into our planning. Let's just tag on to some of these cameras with our class. You know, they're all there ready to use, and see what happens. Believe me, you'll be amazed if you're enthusiastic as a teacher about it, and you encourage the children to watch and talk and investigate and ask questions. I can guarantee the next year you'll want to do some serious work around it in your classroom.
You know, such a positive as well there, like that you mentioned about how people today are still just as interested, because you kind of get the feeling that because people are so separated from nature now and technology. I know there's that thing like the lost words of the Children's Oxford Dictionary some years ago, that they removed however many nature terms and replaced them with like technological terms. But it's really like positive to hear that kids are still interested. We just haven't really given them the opportunity as people used to have. But then when they're given it, they love it, they thrive, and then they get interested.
They absolutely do. And I think, you know, I got to the stage where I was old enough that the children I was teaching, their parents hadn't experienced it. Yet in my early days, or even midway through my career, children would often say, oh, I do that with my gran. And it's like, well, what happened to there was like a middle period of parents who grew up without having that connection.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky enough now to be a grandparent. So my daughter, who was obviously brought up, you know, experiencing the world, outside world, she's now got 2 children, and one of them is coming up 3. And the joy I'm getting of taking her out and about, and the awe and wonder, these, you know, even we were built to be outside. We were built to have our hands in the soil, to feel the sun on our faces, to experiment and to watch and to learn out in the real world, in nature. And sadly, over the years, that's gradually been eked away. And this can be a way, it can be a gateway back in for both adults and children, because I'm giving you that window. You've just got to draw the curtains and watch.
And it's as well, when you say about awe, like there's all that kind of, there's studies into the science behind awe and that glimmers and these kind of things that as humans they benefit our mental health so massively. And so many people more and more are isolated from nature, isolated from other people, having less and less sense of awe. But nature can still provide that, even with everything else that we've got going on with like new phones and computers and all this technology. The thing that really gives us that internal sense of awe usually comes from nature. And it's just really, like you say, the fact that you've kind of laid it all out there, you're giving everyone this opportunity. And it's just a case of teachers having that confidence perhaps to shift from something like traditional, like a chit catching project, but also having that kind of like all of this that you're saying, just the kind of testimonial of this is what you'll get out of it. This is what the pupils get out of it. This is what we all can get out of it. And it's just really exciting. And with that in mind, how's your season looking for this year? Have you seen anything out?
Yeah. I mean, I've got 4 here. I've got 4 or 5 actually, sort of standard boxes. So although nothing's 100%, because we're talking about nature, I would be amazed if I don't have at least 3/4 of those boxes with birds in. Then I've got another site I manage, so I've got some boxes there. I've got a tawny owl site and they've nested in there for the last 8 years, and it's looking good. That's in Worcestershire. And I've got tawny owls and even barn owls looking at some of my boxes. So goodness knows what I might get here. And I've even linked up with a couple of other people, naturalists, and there are other wildlife cams that I live stream. So there's ospreys, a Diffie project here in Wales, so you can watch an osprey nest. I've got another friend who's got peregrine nest in London, and in fact I helped him build a box for ring-necked parakeets, and this year they're looking in, and if they go in we'll live stream that. So it won't just be possibly just the species I get here, but I'll have the opportunity to share other cams as well. So if your class really get into it, which often they do, and you're really enthusiastic as well, which really is the crux of it, isn't it? You as a teacher are the one who drives what happens in your classroom. So if your kids are coming in, you're going, oh my goodness, you'll never guess what, we've just had one, and you're all excited, they are going to get excited as well. So there's lots of different species, and well, in all the years I've done it, I've never not had something to share.
Amazing. And where's, for people who are then listening to this and thinking, oh, I want to find out more, where's the best place that they can go to find out more about what you do and watch your cameras?
Okay, so if you go to wildlifekate.co.uk, you'll be able to see my website, and that will have my live cameras on that are at present. Obviously, I don't live stream the nest boxes until the activity starts. Otherwise, you'll be able to watch bird feeders. I've got a little mammal box where mice and voles and shrews come in. So there's always something to watch. And then I also share cameras with permission from other sites. So obviously, I've got a network of naturalists who are doing similar to me. So I let them use my cameras sometimes, and then I share theirs, and some from all over the world. So you get to see all sorts of wildlife via these cameras. And hopefully it would encourage people to go out and look what's for real out there.
Put all the links for everyone to have a look at this, and we've also got some footage you've kindly sent us that will be kind of giving a little summary of that whole thing that you mentioned, from when they look in the box to start building all the way through to the chicks fledging. So we'll be able to share that from the footage you've got and kindly shared with us.
Yeah, because I record everything. So what we'd hope is that over the next few years that we'd work together as well to create a resource that maybe would help support teachers and give them some materials that they could use in their classroom until they felt confident enough to start creating their own.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time, and obviously everything you're doing for nature, everything you're doing in collaboration with us and all the other groups. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I've learned so much just in 40 minutes, so it's been great.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.